Okay, so according to a large literature, empowerment contributes to a whole range of positive household outcomes such as child health, investments, savings, and going right up to environmental stewardship. And it can also lead national economic development. Some of the citations are given there, World Bank and Duflo 2012. So given this argument, it is clear why government should empower women. The challenge for policymakers, or what the current policy debates are about, is how to empower women. So this question of how to empower women is at the crux of empowerment policy, of the empowerment policy framework used by the World Bank and other institutions. It's sort of a common policy framework that was discussed in 2012 by the World Bank. As the years go by, they tweak it a little bit, but that's the policy framework that is used. And not just a World Bank, other institutions also use this. So I won't explain that graph in that picture in detail. There's a lot in it, but the main point is this: the main focus inside that empowerment framework is our households. Okay, so the World Bank sees this whole process as gender outcomes is a function of households' responses to markets and social norms. That's compressing everything into one picture, one equation. That's what, and that is taken from World Bank 2016. So within that, intra-household bargaining power, or the ability to make household decisions, is considered a significant component of empowerment. This one slide has tons and tons of citations and literature behind it, but I'm just going to leave it there. Okay, so when you talk about empowerment and you think about intra-household bargaining power, what is the economic foundation behind that, right? So it's almost exclusively household bargaining models, okay? And when we talk about bargaining models, there are two types we can say. One is the collective household model of Chiapuri and Browning. And the other one, which is much more popular in this literature, is the cooperative Nash bargaining model by Lundberg and Pollock, Mansur and Brown. So that Lundberg and Pollock article is the most important one. This was written in the mid or late 90s. It's prolifically used even now, especially in development work. There was a paper in JDE in 2014, for in 2017, which goes back to that model. So that's the go-to model. And when I say people use that, I don't mean that, oh, there's a preference, it's okay to use. There's constant vetting of these models of all different types, and that's the one that comes up as a good one. Okay. The point I want to make here is that the prediction of these bargaining models is this: that power is determined by differences in spouses' economic attributes. Okay, specifically, the focus of this literature, or a slightly different literature on developed country labor markets, is one thing we can count on is this prediction that wife's income, when wife's income goes up, her power goes up. Okay, and when I say income, I'll keep saying income. What I mean is unearned income. If I get a windfall, if I get a lottery, or if I get an inheritance like that, not earned income. Again, just a point. That prediction is important because they do a lot with what drives women's empowerment in many different women's power outside of empowerment, about labor market, gender equality. A lot of literature in the US. They cannot handle the other derivative, D power over D wages, labor market earnings. That's very problematic theoretically. So a lot of attention on this main reason that it is an unambiguous positive effect. Okay. The importance of this prediction for us, you see that you can make the connection, the policy implication we see all the time. A common approach to empowering women is through asset transfers, giving them better inheritance rights, or cash transfers, right? Or other policies such as targeted child allowance schemes, both in developed and developing countries. But when I talk about empowerment, it's only about developing countries. So these transfers shift resources away from the husband to the wife. Okay, sometimes not an additional income, but just taking income away from the husband, giving it to the wife. So that's the importance of the prediction. So now, despite the prevalence of bargaining theory, the way I described it, a recent literature looks outside of bargaining models for determinants of power. Okay, I'll say a little bit that the literature on the determinants of power is not very satisfactory. I'll tell you why. So people look for alternatives, and sometimes a small growing recent literature looks outside of bargaining models. So specifically, studies have explored determinants in fields outside of economics, particularly sociology and psychology. For instance, a couple of papers by Ashraf recently examines how processes discussed in sociology, for example, management structure and communication within families. There's a lot of management structures in that literature, as discussed in the literature, for managing finances. Okay, so she looks at how that impacts decision making within, or assignment of decision making within a marriage. There's a complete sort of alternative explanation away from bargaining models. And that is, both of her papers are in the AER in 2009 and 2014. In this paper, we explored the implications of identity, a long established concept in psychology and sociology, for economic models of empowerment in developing countries. One thing is that you want to find alternative mechanisms. The other one, if there is an alternative mechanism that is in operation and you're missing it, the policies that you're designing based on bargaining theory alone can have unintended consequences. That's the motivation for this work. Let me say a little bit about identity economics. In psychology, and as I said in sociology, identity is a big thing. It's been there for decades. Identity is simply, I'll define it as a person's sense of self. There can be a lot more discussion on that. That's the definition of it. So obviously you have this intuition, this thing can, and the whole thing about behavioral economics. So you think about, okay, this might affect how we make purchases and so on. So in a series of articles, Akerlof et al., okay, is done with lemons now. So it's Akerlof et al. Integrated identity into economics, and that's the term identity economics, starting with the Akerlof-Cranton 2000 QJE paper. So how does this work? Identity enters utility via an individual's social category. Not a big deal, just very easily, but very powerful, this theory, via an individual social category, and the prescriptions, what Akerlof calls prescriptions for the individual's behavior. Those prescriptions are given by that social category. Deviations from that prescription creates utility costs for the individual. And these deviations can be triggered by the individual's own actions or somebody else's actions. Here is an example from their paper. Social categories are man and woman. You imagine that those are the two social categories. The prescription, let's say in some communities, some areas, that women should not do a man's job. So deviations in this example is that women working in a man's job creates disutility for male colleagues. Okay, that's the idea. So now there is a growing, so you see what I just told you are ways of thinking about how social norms, which is a big literature, can interact with behavior, right? But what I showed you are thought processes of Akerlof. But there's also this galloping empirical literature, which is very enamored by identity economics because of the new insights that's coming from it. So there's a growing empirical literature on that. Most applications are in developed country contexts, so 2005, 2013, Akerlof himself, various years. And there is this really awesome article by Bertrand et al. 2015 in QJE that directly examines the impact of identity prescriptions, okay, and these are in the gender dimension, on the economic behavior of US couples, okay, and they use hard identification strategies, and they find that that affects economic behavior, okay. And there's a lot more there, but all in that context. So identity, as you can see, arguably has more important implications for gender policies in developing countries. Okay, specifically the prediction of identity theory. What this paper notices that the prediction of identity theory, or IT, for empowering policies is the exact opposite of that bargaining theory. Okay, that prediction that I showed. And to see that, here's a descriptive statement from Akerlof, and I mean, this comes from a very simple Nash bargaining model that they developed very casually in their QJE paper. So everything goes back to that framework. What they show, not like these are not platitude or just it's based on his ideas and that model, but it's a descriptive prediction regardless. So he says that under the prescription, man should earn more than his wife, right? If that's the no, that's the prescription. When the wife's income increases, she will relinquish some of her power. She'll give up some of her power as if to compensate the husband for his identity utility loss, okay? Due to her higher relative income. But why I say it's opposing, and we can talk about the prediction. What does it mean? How do you mean? Do you mean that you became jealous of my spouse? And that operates in a certain way, but that's what, for us, what it says that it contradicts the bargaining theory prediction, because under bargaining theory, a negative effect is impossible without, as you say, breaking the model. You don't say it, but you don't put it. So without like throwing away the assumptions of the model. Okay, so our objectives, okay. So despite the opposing predictions, what is surprising is this, that no economic models of women's empowerment incorporate identity, and there is absolutely no econometric work on this issue.
Yeah. Can I ask a question?
Yeah, absolutely.
I hate to disrupt your
No,
flow.
there's no disturb. Please ask.
Just back to the identity theory proposition on the previous slide. Do those propositions hold regardless of culture? Like the US would be a very different place to kind of look at identity theory than, say, for example, India.
Yeah.
But does the theory hold broadly in all these locales?
Yeah. So Akerlof specifically talks about the US. So what he has a wide variety of applications. So he takes up lawsuits that were fought in companies like Deloitte, where women, some issue that, so he's talking about the US. Even in the US, whether it holds or not, is that growing empirical literature that is showing. So that Bertrand paper will say that what he is saying over here, I don't know if they do that specifically, but one of those predictions or many of those predictions they test in that paper. The other paper is this paper, which takes that and tries to see if that holds or some of this holds in a development.
Right.
Okay. And that's going to turn out to what you said, that, oh, it's changing culture. That's going to turn out to be a key point that I'll make in this paper. Yes, any questions, please ask me anytime.
Yes,
yeah.
okay, so under the bargaining theory, the negative effect on power cannot occur under bargaining theory. So negative effect of what it is?
So we are always talking about a rise in the woman's income and what happens to her power. So it cannot have a negative effect on her power. Okay?
Yeah, it's income increase her power also increases. That's the bargaining theory.
Yes. So, and I'm going to come back to that point a little bit, okay, in a more nuanced way when I talk about the hypothesis. But yeah, please ask me questions anytime. Okay, so the overall goal is to econometrically test if the data are consistent with the predictions of bargaining theory and or identity theory. The specific objective, very simple, does an exogenous increase in wives' incomes increase their power as predicted by bargaining theory, or does it decrease their power consistent with the prediction of IT? Okay, and you are thinking against the relative sizes, we'll see. That's what I want to see. Does it offset it completely? Identity theory might be present, but I may not see it if it's not negative enough. Okay.
So,
Yeah.
What do you mean by decrease of power? Because it should all else be equal, it should remain the same.
Why is that?
Because identity theory says, okay, as a husband, when my wife gets a higher salary, I'm upset. So she needs to give up something, but she's not going to give up everything, right?
That's an empirical question, right? So because when you say everything, right, we are abstractly talking about a reality where there is a real husband and a real wife, right? The wife suddenly gets a CEO position, what exactly is she giving up, right? So the everything is that, right? So, and we'll come back and see a little bit of
But that doesn't make her strictly weaker, right?
if it is strong enough, right?
Okay.
So that's
Cool.
what, yeah.
Maybe you can.
Yeah, and you'll get a chance to see that again and make that point again. All right. So now the contributions, we provide the first evidence on the joint importance of BT and IT for empowerment policies, bargaining theory, identity theories. More generally, we contribute to the literature on the determinants of power, okay? There's a large literature. So when you think about empowerment, women's empowerment, there's a large literature starting, I'm talking about like lower journal papers to work by Duflo and RCT and all of that. So there's a large literature devoted to how do household outcomes like child health and all of that depend on power, okay? There's very little literature or econometrics work on the other question, how does power depend on its determinants, okay? That thin literature that is there on what determines power, many studies rely on anecdotal evidence and they go forward with that as the truth. Many of them are case studies, or some of them, and I give examples, they use empirical specifications which are not based on in any theory. So they just drive the empirical truck around, whatever sticks, and they come to a conclusion. Others, which is a bigger problem, use observational data, right, survey data on determinants such as women's income. They have information in it. What are your assets, this, that, or the labor force participation. They directly put that on the right-hand side. On the left-hand side is an accepted measure of power, and they say, oh, that's a positive or a negative. But you can see in the last one that is very, very clearly endogenous, okay? All right, so that's why this paper contributes in as for determinants also. So here's the plan for the rest of the talk. What I'm going to do is to outline a conceptual or a theoretical framework that rationalizes the prediction of IT, of identity theory with the standard household model and derive hypothesis. I want to make a clarification here. I'm going to spend 3-4 slides talking about that. And you know that I'm not a theory person, okay? And this is a completely empirical paper. But I cannot derive that hypothesis until I go into that theory and take it out, because you know some of these questions already. How does it become negative? How does it become positive? So think about theory as this gigantic building that I don't usually go into, and there's a small room in the back, and then one light bulb is off. So I'm just going to go change that one thing, and that is going to shed light on my theory. Okay, you'll see literally just one thing, but that has a huge implication for what I do empirically. But again, it's an empirical paper. So then I'm going to describe the data on married women in India. I'm going to discuss the econometric approach, how I identify identity effects, and how I identify the women's income shock. Then I give the results and conclusion. 3 and 4 are the main parts of the paper. Okay. Because of the amount of material and the time, I might go faster than so please stop me if I go fast, right? So, or ask questions, whatever. Okay. So let's look at the framework when we talk about Nash bargaining models, what they use. Let's just see what it is, right? So we consider a standard cooperative Nash bargaining model with 2 decision makers, wife, which I call 1, right? With preferences or utility functions, and that has a 1. And then the husband is 2 with preferences U2. The cooperative household equilibrium is obtained by maximizing the Nash social welfare function. Okay, I'll tell you about that. But when you look at this, when we talk about general things, okay, how is this household spending money on alcohol versus books? How is this household doing greener practices? Is this house so the household you're talking about is that household. This is that level of the problem. Okay, there's a different level, so I'm just clarifying. In 481, we see that maximized utility is subject to a budget constraint. This is the equivalent of that. So what we see here is that you have the household utility is a weighted average of the husband and wife utility, where lambda is the weight, the utility weight for the female, for the wife. 1 minus lambda is the utility weight for the husband. right? So you can just directly see that has the direct connotation of how much say or influence the woman has. This is very, very commonly used, okay? Lambda is bargaining power. So now, notice that what I'm writing as that weighted utility function. So this is not the collective model, which is more standard to do that, right? This is twisting that Nash bargaining. If you might be thinking that product function with the reservation utility. So I'm just twisting it to write it like this. It's equivalent because I'm defining that lambda, okay, is equal to, I'm just gonna say a ratio. It's a little different than a ratio. Lambda is U1 upper bar divided by U2 upper bar, okay? So lambda and those bars are called threat utilities, okay? So U1 upper bar is the threat utility of wife, okay? This is her utility level without him, okay? So just in short, right? So let's say me and Philippe, we have a friendship, right? So, and then let's say we fight, right? So when we come back, I will have more power over him if I'm kind of okay, yeah, fine, whatever you do, I don't care, right? But if I'm like wimpy and so Philippe, my friend, come back, then so my threat utility is less. That's exactly how these non-cooperative bargaining models work, okay? The leader always is the tough guy. Oh, internal voice, sorry. So her power lambda is an increasing function of her threat utility. So these threat utility levels, okay, which I'm black boxing because I'm giving you where do they come from, right? So that comes from that non-cooperative scenario where I said we had a little fight that you don't see at this level. So the non-cooperative scenario could be divorce, right? So here's a couple, the power I have depends on how well off if I get divorced. But in developing countries, oftentimes women's rights over children, over property, over everything is so low, right? So in the event of divorce, they really are in a really bad situation. So they have weaker power, okay? They have lesser power over households. There are a lot of stories there, but I'll go on. Instead of divorce, it could just be a non-cooperation, okay, within the marriage, okay, where you flex, but you're not getting divorced. There is some other procedure, okay? That latter is a more plausible non-cooperative scenario because you don't, for this kind of bargaining, you don't say that, okay, I'm going to get divorced, we don't give you good food, okay? Although someone, so the more plausible scenario is called separate. It's called separate spheres bargaining by Lundberg and Pollock. Yes. Yes.
Can we go back to
Oh,
the
yeah.
slide?
Yeah.
Yeah. So even before you are embarking on the econometric approaches, you are assuming that lambda is a negative function of U by 2.
Yes.
But,
Yes.
that is to be confirmed from the econometric approach, right?
No. So what happens is that we have to stand on the shoulders of giants, right? So here is a model. Someone comes with it. It's unknown, a paper in the late 1990s, and then she becomes famous. Why? Because that model is taken and used in the literature and vetted 1,000 times, right? So that work of confirming that model is already done, right? But even don't do it empirically. She's showing it theoretically. It just happens to be, right? But when they show it theoretically, it's all logical, like 2 + 2 = 4 kind of stuff, right? You can write a new paper. Is that true? But you cannot. That's sort of an assumption at this stage. Okay.
So just a clarification.
Yeah.
Your lambda it's a result or it's an assumption? Your lambda equal U1 bar divided by U1 bar plus U2 bar.
No, we're just saying that the power
Yeah.
depends on the threat utilities.
Yes. Okay, so it just is an assumption.
Yes. Right. Whether it holds empirically or not is a different thing. Okay. So where I'm going with this is to talk about one particular non-cooperative model. So I'm going back, given that non-cooperative model, this is what will come up.
Okay, so I understand when you're going to have a shock on income, your U1 bar, U2 bar, they're going to change, and you're going to test how they change. I mean,
Yeah, I mean, somebody could, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. It's scary. But yeah, exactly. And I think that actually clarifies Mo's point more. Yeah,
Maybe a follow-up to that. This the trade utility theory. It's exclusively about the trade-off between utilities of wife and husband, right? It doesn't consider the interrelatedness of the spouse's utility. For example, if a wife gives the rights or increase income, there's some way that whole household.
okay. So here, very good. So the short answer is yes, it's interrelated, right? This is also related to their point, because what I'm backing out of is a particular non-cooperative scenario. Like I said that, power comes from two people. It comes from the fact what happens when they fight. That's what I said, right? So this comes from a particular fight situation, right? And whether it's interrelated or not depends on the model I'm talking about. So when I show you the model, you'll see where that comes from. Okay, because what I want to do, as I said, that it's a standard model that I'm going to go into, right, to show that prediction, because that prediction income increases, right, wife power increases is not that obvious. It's obvious intuitive, right? If you think about the unitary model in 481 and all, individual wife's income should not matter to anything. It's pooled income, right? Okay, so yeah, so I'll come back to that, okay? All right, so to derive the hypothesis regarding women's income and power, we need to unpack and look into that non-cooperative scenario. And what we do, one change, we introduce identity into a standard specification of separate spheres bargaining based on Pollock 94 and Anderson et al. 2017. Okay. So here's an outline. There are slides in the appendix, but we don't need that. It's already okay. So the idea behind separate spheres bargaining is this, that each spouse spends their time on 3 different activities. Why I need that? Why 3 different activities? Why am I bogging you down? Because we need those activities to be able to show what we want to show. Okay. Otherwise, there are no mechanisms through which that can occur. Okay. Each spouse spends time on wage market work, leisure, or on producing a household public good like housework. So your point about interrelationship, it's all about that. Okay. All right. So the household public good is produced using husband's money. Okay. I think earlier on I said, when I gave that prediction from bargaining theory, I said this already takes into account social norms and the division of labor between husband and wife based on traditional gender roles. Otherwise, one can say, when you talk about identity, there is this ginormous work on social norms that thousands and thousands of things have been written in economics, sociology, all these places. So I'm saying that they take all that into account and still they prove that it is possible. Okay. So here you see that the public good is produced by husband and wife, but the husband gives money and the wife gives labor. The husband doesn't do any housework. Okay. So the spouses operate in this way, what are called separate spheres. These spheres are based on traditional gender norms. Okay. This model, and I will not comment on that, is used in other places, but this can be a very good approximation for developing countries. Okay. Especially the context of India that we are talking about. Okay. All right. So now the non-cooperative equilibrium is a disagreement, or when cooperation breaks down. What happens in this model, I'm just describing the model, I'm not claiming anything. So the spouses retreat into their own spheres. Okay, he goes back to his money, she goes back to her labor, and they don't talk to each other. They provide that public good based only on their own preference. Okay, I don't care if you like fish or not, I'm going to cook fish. Okay, like that. So the result in that literature is called harsh words and burnt toast. So they are married, but it's not, nobody's happy. They're definitely not in that shiny cooperative equilibrium that we talked about. Okay. And also remember that cooperative equilibrium is paradoefficient by definition. Here it is more inefficient. Okay. So that is each individual, this is that interlinked, maxes utility. When I say own sphere, the max utility taking the other public good contribution as given. The solution is quite easy. It's a Nash equilibrium where you're using best response functions for household good production, right? So when you solve it, you get the money supply function for the husband, get the labor supply function for the wife into the public good. You take those curves, balance, and that gives you your thing. Okay. The utility each achieves on their own, that is the threat utility, okay, that U bar and okay. And that determines power, as I said. I'm just taking that lambda is equal to U1 bar over U2 bar and expanding where that comes from. I cannot take that derivative with that one new light bulb without showing this. Okay. So bargaining theory prediction, wife's income and power are positive. And how do they do it? They take comparative statistics on that wife's individual utility maximization. Okay. So the wife maximization, okay, if I go too fast, you tell me. If I go too slow, you tell me. Okay, is max utility of X, which is a private good that the wife consumes, like food or whatever. And LS1 is time spent sleeping, that is leisure. And G is the public good, simple enough, right? Subject to her own budget constraint, right? Which has that unearned income in it, okay? Subject to her own time constraint, right? And subject to that common household good production technology, right? And usually it is assumed that the inputs, the husband's money and the wife's time are perfect substitutes in that production, okay? All right. So what here is that light bulb that into this standard bargaining theory setup, we introduce one change, that is we introduce identity utility for the husband, okay? And how I look at it is that look at the upper utility function, it stops at G. The husband just has one extra term right after G, okay? Minus alpha C L1M, okay? And there's a semicolon alpha C. What it says, and then he maximizes that subject to his budget, blah, 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 okay? What I'm saying is that he loses utility alpha C, okay? When she earns more from the labor market, because LM1 is her, you know, she has three things that she does. So wage market work is one of the things she does, okay? So when LM1 goes up, his utility goes down by alpha, okay? By alpha, okay? I'll talk about C in a second. It's a huge reality in many countries, especially in India. I mean, big, it's a real thing. And it's not only the problem with the husband, it's a problem with the husband and the in-laws, okay? And you'll find like people, and I'm not saying that I've heard, I know such people where these are brilliant women. One a particular example is that she's like a CEO of, like there are 16 or 17 banks, she's the boss. But when she comes back home, she has to apologize, or I have to stay till 5, all kinds of like unbelievable things in terms of this type of concept. Okay, so size of his identity utility loss alpha, I think you were talking about that, depends on his social group, okay, and prescriptions about the role of a wife from that social group, okay? Yeah.
Can you say a few things about this alpha, in particular, whether it's between some values? What's the
no bounds on it? It's like
no bounds?
No, it's like a regression.
So that means okay.
So it could be positive.
Yes. Yes, absolutely.
So if it was positive, that would mean that the husband is so proud
Yes.
of his wife
Yes.
making more money.
Yes.
Okay.
So then
which
the
makes sense,
yeah.
right? Too.
But the prescription there would be, it's good for both spouses to work. Then alpha C will be positive. Yeah, go on.
Yeah, and it could be positive in the sense that okay, but it could be equal to 1. In that sense.
Yeah.
Every additional amount of money she gets, I lose it in terms of, or every additional utils she gets, I lose it, right? Which is really strong because as far as the couple is concerned, there's no gain or loss here. Even if there is an external influx of income for the woman, then one alpha is lost basically for the whole couple.
The whole couple. Yeah, for the whole couple, right? So if the wife goes and works and alpha is equal to 1, I lose 1 if my wife works, right?
Yeah.
For
She
the
gets,
household,
she gets 1, I lose 1.
Yeah.
So for
Yeah.
the whole couple.
yeah,
you
for the
lose.
whole couple, it's nothing.
So I would think that this alpha should be probably less than 1. I mean, no, I don't know.
Why should it be? Because there are things, this is the non-cooperative scenario, right? So even if it, so they, look, there is no maximization going on by the husband. You see that? There is no choice variable in that identity item. It's just that whether she works or not. So if she works, right, in the cooperative solution, our preference is that that's different. But in the non-cooperative solution, we don't talk to each other, right? So if we are friends, we're roommates, and then I start smoking, right? Your alpha can go down, but I'm not listening to what you're saying. It's my preference to smoke, which makes alpha go wherever it wants to go.
Well, yeah, good.
Well, I was going to say, I think one of the interesting things in this is what is C? I mean, you can imagine C, if you define a social group broadly as a cohort of people. For example, younger people are probably would respond a lot differently, and alpha might be different for a young male in a relationship than someone who's in their 70s or 60s.
Mm-hmm.
Which I think would be an interesting way to look at that, if you could get cohort effects.
Yeah, absolutely. I was
Social
going to write that
class
down,
effects.
but yeah.
In scheduled class, maybe the alpha is higher.
Yeah.
Right?
That's
So
right.
do you conceptually distinguish earned income from endowment income in the modeling work or in only in the empirical work?
In the, I just stay away from, you said earned income, right?
Before when you were talking about bargaining models, you were saying the identification of that has been reliant on data on non-earned income, like endowment income, so that you can distinguish the endogeneity issue.
Right.
How do you handle it here? Because you were talking about it's earned income choices by the woman. So which is it?
So here, very good question. Okay. So I am saying that as the econometrician, if I want to identify income effects on the woman, I face an endogeneity problem. Okay. But my strategy for overcoming that is here. But the woman can go get an inheritance that is unearned income. In this model, she goes and works the labor market, that is earned income. But I will not try to write a paper. Actually, I'm writing, it's an econometric thing, right? So I will not go and try to identify that, at least in this paper. But the mechanisms of what they are not restricted. Right? So, okay. All right.
Yeah, Professor.
Yeah.
So how are you distinguishing between utility and set utility here? I mean.
Okay, very good. So the utility function, remember in cooperation, the weighted utility function,
Yeah.
that is just the utility function, not filled up, right? So when you go to the non-cooperation, you have a utility function, right? But when you solve the non-cooperative equilibrium, you get an indirect utility function, right? When you solve any utility maximization problem, you get an indirect utility function.
Yeah.
So the indirect utility in the non-cooperative solution is the threat utility. Okay, all right. Okay, so now, okay. And we are going to talk about alpha C. Peter, that's a great point, the cohort thing, because I can do that in my data.
That might be a different scenario between the developed and the developing countries as well, right?
Yeah. And I haven't, I have enough results to make my story, but there's a lot of descriptives and robustness that I need to do anyway. Okay, good. So I just copied the two utility functions up there from the previous slide. I can do all of this in Beamer. So what they do, how they show that positive result, okay, is this. It's a very specific thing. How you go into these models and show it, it's easy. Somebody else has done it, right? Wife's response, when wife's unearned income D1, so imagine the budget constraint has a D1. I have slides on this in the back, but it's too easy. So from the first order conditions of the wife's utility maximization, when she gets D1, her leisure, her public good, these are all normal goods, private good consumption goes up, okay? But because her public good consumption is going up, she has to put more of her time in producing the public good that she's consuming more, okay? As a result, notice leisure is going up, right? Home production time is going up. So her market wage work is going to go down, has to go down because the time constraint will bind. So the argument is this, that her utility level goes up. That means her threat utility goes up, okay? And here you will see that, oh, that means her power will go up. But so Sandeep implies that the threat utility of the husband doesn't go up, right? So there's a small point there, but it's still unambiguous that the husband's threat utility, according to this model, it's well known, goes up a little bit. Okay, that's something even. So it goes up a little bit. I'll tell you really quickly, because that technology is perfect substitutes. When she puts more into the public good, right, I withdraw the money a little bit. I don't pay that much anymore because I'm getting it for free. So when you don't pay that much, there's a small income effect, okay? And that comes from the perfect substitute thing. That makes everything better for me, but it's a smaller income effect compared to D1, obviously, right? So the point is that the net effect is an increase in threat utility of the wife, right? And an increase in her power, okay. But now, given that identity stuff, the husband's response, this is where bargaining theory stops, but that derivative doesn't stop there. You can see that since the wife's market wage work up there, you agreed that LM1 goes down, right? What is going to happen is that husband's identity utility is going to go up by alpha C. Okay, if that positive identity effect on husband's threat utility is greater, right? The positive effect on the husband is so happy, right? Is greater than the positive wife income effect on her threat utility. The wife's threat utility will decrease, okay, relative to the husband's. In other words, wife's power will go down. So this is why these predictions are opposing, okay? And there was something about the size and the bounds on it. All of that depends on alpha. The size of alpha depends on the cohort or the social category you're talking about. But again, for me, that's an empirical question, okay? So the hypothesis that I'm going to talk about, okay, in the household equilibrium, an income transfer to the wife will cause an unambiguous increase in her power. This is bargaining theory, okay, and will cause or a decrease in her power, which is identity theory. I'm saying that there could be an identity effect. You may not see if it doesn't swamp it. You can only see if it is big enough, right? This one is interesting to me, is that so there are two alternative theories that could be explaining things, and we can see the policy implications of that. But so what I'm saying is that you have a policy, and it could be either bargaining theory at work or identity theory at work. And if you're an empowerment policymaker, you better hope that bargaining theory is at work, because you're going to disempower women. Okay, that's the idea. So the switch between bargaining theory or identity theory may not be policy specific, but household or cohort specific, which gives you some ideas how it can, because social norms are very hard to change, right? Gives you some idea, but need some genius ideas how to do that. The size of the negative identity effect on power will depend on a household or household group's prescriptions regarding the role of the wife. That it will depend on the household parameter alpha C, which itself may be molded by policy. Okay, so that last part is the final sort of suggestion. If I find identity effects, then there are a lot of things to be done, not by me, in figuring out how you can change. If I can, give you personalized ads, once I know that you have parked your Amazon cart and you're more likely to buy, there are ways, clever marketing things you can do to target alpha C. Okay.
So Sandeep, when you say policy, it sounds like you're using that term broadly to include things like development, education, training, interventions of various kinds. So, like a gender relations workshop in the village would be a policy.
Yes. Yes. And what we are going to do, the answer to your question is yes. When I say policy for alpha, I mean those types of things. But I'll come back to it in the conclusion when I go back to it. Okay. I got what you're saying, but I want to hear more on that because I don't have much to say about what those policies are. So
Okay.
So the data. Okay. Now it's a nationally representative data set. It has over 21,000 currently married women aged 15 to 49. There is information in 2012. Okay. If observed in 2005, 2012, they tracked the same households, okay, and 76% of that random sample were tracked. That it wasn't an independent survey. The survey was deployed to go track those households. The total survey, so my N is around 21,000 married women. This whole survey is 40,000 households across all states of India. The nice thing about it is that the sampling procedures, representativeness are all of it, right? Any questions you have are all extensively documented at the University of Maryland website. So all of our, as I said, I haven't done much of the groundwork, like in terms of robustness, but I checked that all of my sample proportions, supposing mean age of married women and all that, match those, what is documented there on their site, because I'm extracting out married women, so I could be screwing up the sample. And they have documents online which shows how they cross-check their proportions across India census and all the large-scale surveys that occur. Okay, so I'm fairly confident in terms of this as a second best but good data set. Okay, I don't know why this is getting cut. The measure of power is participation and decision making concerning major household purchases. Okay, the reason, so I told you that me and Leo were working on some other paper that is all about that power measure and building up 3 different angles and changing that and all of that. Here, what I want to do, I want to show the effects of identity, all else constant. This measure, participation in decision making, is something that is the most typical measure. So the Anderson article that I talk about from JDE, they use exactly the same measure. So I want to keep that same measure of power and show this. Power is equal to 1 if wife participates in the decision, 0 else. Okay. There are other decisions that you cannot see about own health. I haven't had time to look at that, but it can be something that can help me sort of texturize my findings. Yeah.
So, you know, the use of the word participate is interesting. What if it, you know, what if the wife is the partner that makes the decision?
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, so that you know, rather than a binary variable, like it could be, it could vary from 0 to 100.
Yeah. No, that's fair.
I'm just thinking back on some of the work that Vic did.
Yeah. No, what I'm
where
saying,
we did not find surprising results, right?
So what
In
I'm
other words, the wife was making the decision.
Right. What I'm saying is that that idea, when you talk about power, there is this whole thing about measurement. There is also a whole thing about the conceptual definitions of power, right?
So yeah, okay, I can see.
So
empirically that would be hard to tease out.
So no. So what I'm saying is that I have written papers on the measurement part of that. But in here, I want to preserve the most typical definition of power, because I want to take that and show identity effects and if it changes. Yeah,
Okay.
Just a fact. Is it self-reported? Is it the wife who says, yeah?
Yes. And there are studies which look at conflicts and all of that. Yeah, there's a lot in terms of, so the first thing is that, as I said, that other paper is about the discontent with this entire literature that uses this, right? But in this paper, I have to take it, right? So because then if I change it, then it could be because of that change rather than identity.
I mean, it's better than no information, right? I mean, it's reported.
You know, that JD paper that I talked about, that has this measure, you know?
Why aren't you including all of like what can I say on decision to child marriage?
Yes. Yes.
Why aren't you?
Yeah, because I want to keep the standard measure of power that the literature uses, right, in JDE and good journals, and show what happens when you add identity. If I innovate on the measure of power, so with some work with Brent and students, we have done some work on changing the measure of power, looking at power differently, conceptually, all kinds of things. But if you're doing that innovation, you don't know whether what I'm finding is because of that or because of identity, right? So that's why. So I just take that as a given.
But I have seen surveys in, I mean, you are talking about JDE, I have seen surveys in WDJDE also that they are measuring the women's empowerment through like in agriculture, also in decision making of child marriage education. Yeah, I mean, the women's power is measured through very different ways that they are published in good journals.
Okay, maybe I'll take a look at a different way. Yeah. So, all right. So now we talk about identity identification. Okay, how do I identify identity effects? I could go do that, right? The cohort thing, or I can have. So what I look at, again, I build on something that is well established in the literature. So let me just say, Hindu obviously is a religion, caste. Okay, good. Hurry up a little bit here. Caste is a social class that's assigned at birth in India to Hindus. Parda is a practice. It's the practice of veiling your face, okay? And it's the practice of female seclusion. It's not just veiling your face. That's a whole system of things in operation. The idea behind that is to restrict the movements of women outside, in markets, inside the house, physically restrict their movement. Okay. So this parda in Hindu households or veiling starts at marriage. Okay. In Muslim households, it starts at birth. So it has a very different connotation. So when this starts at marriage, it enforces control over women to establish the dominance of in-laws. Okay. So actually the Fafshon reference should be up there. So a lot of people look at this. There are popular articles on further that you can look at and all of that. So I'm just taking from there. So we exploit variation in known prescriptions about wives' roles across caste parda combinations, okay, to identify identity effects. Wives in high caste households face greater restrictions regarding their higher, so this is a little surprising maybe, but it's a well-known fact. Wives in so in India, you have the caste, you have, I just simplify and say high caste, who are historically the privileged class, and low caste, who are the underprivileged class. So what happens is in the high caste households, the wives face much greater restrictions, okay? In the roles and social roles and all of that compared to the low caste counterparts. Similarly, wives who practice veiling face more restrictions compared to their non-veil counterparts. These are not opinions or platitudes. There's this like, you can take these things as dissertations, articles, all of that, right? So Fafshon, Paris et al. Are just 3 of the references. Okay. So that's how I will look at. So thus wives in high caste and those who practice veiling are most conservative. If I was doing it with the age cohorts, it would be the like same.
Yeah. I just have one observation.
Yeah, sure.
Like in South Asia, parda is mostly practiced in Muslim households.
No.
I have not seen.
You haven't seen, but I'm saying statistically, it's very popular. It has a different name in Hindu households. It's called ghungat, right? And that parda, and I'm only, and so there is an interesting issue. So I'm looking only at Hindu, right? So in India, you also have Muslims, right? And I take care of that in my estimation in a particular way that I can explain after the seminar. But in Hindu households, about 80 to 90% do veiling. So
because in my country, Bangladesh, so only the Muslim.
And then the other thing is this, that parda is different for Muslim households, right? Because it doesn't start in marriage, right?
It just starts from like.
But okay, so I'm just using that.
Yeah.
All right. So wives, I'm a little bit stressed. I have 25 minutes. So wives' income shock identification. Okay. Typical measures of women's earned income in power equations are current or inherited assets. Both of them are endogenous, but they're used all the time. So what I do is that I use a natural experiment called the Hindu Succession Act Amendments, pretty well known, right, in India to model an unearned wealth or income shock for wives. So let me tell you a little bit about the HSA. In India, okay, just a little history, inheritance laws vary by region and religious affiliation. Historically, laws for women's inheritance were extremely discriminatory, okay? And this is one of the first laws in 956. And one example is the daughters of a father dying without a will had no inheritance rights to joint family property, and the son would get double, like that. So there's lot there in terms of that law. So what HSA did was it granted equal inheritance rights to women who were unmarried at the time of the reform in their state. Okay, that was the policy. That was the eligibility criteria. Evaluation studies show that HSA significantly increased women's likelihood of inheriting assets and potential income. So this is Denninger, Roy, some of those references. Okay, I'm just using that as one of my explanatory variables, better than what struggling to do that. So HSA is exogenous and changed because it's a state level thing, right? It changed inheritance rights for some wives, explained by what is some, not randomly, but not based on women's attributes that contribute to their power, okay? Which we had a randomized control trial, right? Don't have that, but this will work. So there is no selection bias. So our identification strategy is similar to people who evaluated this, similar, right? We exploit the staggered implementation of HSA across states and over time to identify wives' income shock. HSA implemented in 5 states at 4 points in time, 975 to 994. There are 4 points in which HSA were given to different states. Okay, the rest was in 2005. That is my other footnote. Other than what I say, what do I do with the non-Hindus? Right? There is something about 2005, but I'll leave it as a footnote for after. So treated women, treat is equal to 1. They belong to treated religions, it is called the Hindu Succession Act, but it includes Hindu, Buddhist, Sikh, and Jain religions. Okay, and whose year of marriage, the woman's marriage, is greater than the state receiving the reform. Okay, so the dependent weight. Any questions? Did I scare you? I just was a little. No. Yeah.
Is the observation that higher caste means a worse identity correct?
Yeah.
Is it because in a higher caste the man feels like they need to provide more, and if the woman is working, then that is like looks terribly on them in that sense? Whereas in a lower caste, it might actually be more of an equal relationship where they both need to work to survive.
Yeah. So you also see the labor market participation of lower caste is much higher, like that, right? So all these we can talk about that a lot. A lot of things going on. Yeah.
So this treatment variable is composed of 2 things, right? Being in a certain religion and being in a certain state, right? So
religion, state, year of marriage.
Yes, but like the religion is a choice variable, right? People can choose to belong to which religion they want, right?
No, but that is possible, right? But not in India, not in But that is definitely possible because I can convert, right? That's a good point. It's a good point, right? And so very good point, because then you have to think about that, right? If they're switching and all of that.
But there's no way around, right? You're not going to change your religion because you could receive an inheritance.
Yeah.
You could do that?
No, not in India, but
not in India.
Yeah. Right? So one thing that related to that point, one of the things is about migration, right? That could be a serious compromise to identification. But then again, I'm using this because I know some facts about it, right? So that other article by Roy did a study on migration, and they found that only like 3% of women moved, and that's not it. But that's okay. So the dependent variable is power, lambda, right? In 2012. Okay. So because I have to do the fixed effects, I need to rewrite this like this tedious subscript. You can ignore it. It is the power of the wife, W, married in year Y, of treated religion R, living in state district, right? At time T. Okay. So this is what it looks like. You can just see that lambda is a function of treatment. You ignore everything else for now. Okay. So ignoring all else, the coefficient on treatment alpha 1 is the causal effect of wife's income increase on her bargaining power. Agree? If you ignore everything else, right? Okay. So the identifying assumption at a very basic level is in absence of HSA, there is no difference in mean power of treated and controlled. Okay, that means alpha 1 is equal to 0. That has to be true. Okay. Or in other words, when we say econometrically, the conditional mean of errors is independent of treatment. Okay, that's our identifying assumption or the identifying. Okay. So now that assumption is violated, right? Some of it you have already said. If unobservables correlated with HSA, right, switching, affect power of treated and untreated women differently, okay? So for instance, state-specific gender policies, right? There are a lot of grassroots district policies also. State-level trade policies, they open up trade and there are these jobs that are very good for women rather than for men, that kind of stuff, right? Within state, women self-help groups, a lot of these at the district level. Okay, marriage timing effects. Okay, just a little bit here, but I have to. We can talk after. And then when I talk about marriage timing, I have so many marriage years, right? So I think about it in decades. I could think about it in 5-year intervals, but for now, I just think that hey, there's a problem because 80s wives can be different than 90s wives. They have higher power levels because of their marriage, whatever, right? So, but those are issues there. And then there are treated religion-specific effects. Maybe that cohort is already high power, right? So what I do is that I remove these differences by using fixed effects, delta. So now you don't have to ignore everything else. If you look at the last line, the delta is a series of fixed effects. Okay, so I remove this by using fixed effects for all 3 sources of variation possible in the definition of the treatment, which is, we just listed it, right? 3 things: religion, state, district, marriage year. Okay. I'm using marriage decade because there are too many marriage years. Now, the betas are the coefficients on standard spousal economic differentials like education and age, okay, and controls for the wealth of the household. I put them in if it is exogenous. I want to see the consistency with theory. That theory says there should difference, right? Older women like that, older men, and all of those differentials, right? I want to see that a little bit. And finally, rho is the autoregressive coefficient. Okay, it is the coefficient on current power on past power. Okay, I will talk about that when I show you the results. Right now, I'll move on. The purpose of that here is that it absorbs all remaining, hopefully, all remaining variations, uncontrolled variation in power, as in any autoregressive model. All right. So there are 4 treatments. So now we can look at the interactions. Okay. What I have done is that treat, high caste, treat, veil. So we have this combination: high caste, low caste, veil, no veil. So I'm looking at all 4 combinations. Okay. So there are 4 treatment coefficients, alpha j. So the impact of the positive shock to income of treated wives living under different prescriptions. Okay, that is where my identity variation comes from. Okay, any questions on that? I won't say anything more. Sorry. So this goes on in 575, so it's okay. So it's just like non-cooperative equilibrium all the time. So testable hypothesis, bargaining theory. So I'm going to convert our hypothesis to the testable form. Bargaining theory, alpha j, all the alphas that you say are greater than equal to 0, right? And then you can say, talk about, why is it equal to 0? You hear all of these things from the social norm literature that, if the social norms are not conducive, bargaining, giving women land may not be empowering. You will always hear that, right? So that's the role of social norm. So that bargaining theory takes that into account when I talked about it earlier, and it says that, yeah, it may not affect. right? But it doesn't, it just says it's greater or equal. There are other things, other literature shows, giving land, it's a big thing to give land to women as a policy. Land may not be empowering if women don't have access to complementary inputs, right? So again, that justifies that 0 in that top hypothesis. Okay. Identity theory, it can be negative. Okay. The second hypothesis, right, testable hypothesis 2, you can see that alpha 4, alpha 2. So I've taken down the dummy things, right? Veiled, high caste, and high caste, which are the most conservative groups, right? My hypothesis that the veiled high caste will be in magnitude the strongest identity effect. Okay. Next, high caste, and then alpha 3 and alpha 1 are the low caste veil, low caste no veil, right? So definitely it should be. So the second hypothesis, or H2, implies that the utility loss alpha C, how much it hurts the husband, and because of that, the compensatory decrease in wife's power, right? So how much it bothers you and how much she compensates you for that, right? Will follow a predictable pattern. And that pattern is this array of coefficients. Yes, yes.
Don't we have something like no veil, high caste here in testable hypothesis 2?
Veil high caste.
No veil, high
Oh,
caste.
so see that where it says high caste?
Yeah.
That is no veil high caste. Okay. So then what I have here, there are a couple of other models, not many. There's one with nothing and fixed effects that I don't include. But you can see that there are 4, but then there are others that I'm not showing, but they're all consistent with this. So you see that the first column just has the treatment variable, okay? There is another column that I've not included. It has just treatment and the fixed effects. And the third column has just treatment and some explanatory variables. The next one has the interaction terms, the identity changes, and the last one has everything and the fixed effects, okay? So I'm gonna walk you through these things. So I'm gonna take snapshots of that same table, and I'm looking at model 1, 2, or something, okay? So I've copied and pasted the testable hypothesis thing here, so we can see what's going on. So if you look at treatment, okay? If you look at the first 2 models, the fact that it is positive and significant, right? My claim is that this is what is found in the literature, right? They make that prediction, and all your questions about utility, whether it works or not, here is the response to that. And that is what the literature finds or should find if they do it, right? So I said treatment is positive, H1 or hypothesis 1. So this is support for bargaining theory, d lambda over d wife income greater than 0, increases wife's power, the probability of decision making increases between 3 to 5%. And with that same hypothesis, there is no evidence of large negative IT effects. So if there were large enough effects, this would become negative, right? But it is not. Any questions?
Well, based upon what I said, look at the age. The age difference is negative.
Yeah, I'm going to that. But you are saying that, right? I'm going to that one. But are you saying in terms of the cohort?
Well, I think that, I mean, this isn't a cohort, but it could be, and I think that makes it worth looking at.
Yes,
right?
I'm going. I literally mean I'm going to that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the income, is it relative or the absolute income of wife? The income.
So sorry. Income is my treatment, right? When you say income means we are using that HSA, that natural experiment. If you are treated, that's the income. So that is, it's not an income, it's a shock to wife's income. Okay. So here, so you see that that's what you're saying, that spousal economic differences, right? So no, lag power, past power level matters, and I think that's a lot there. I haven't seen many papers which are able to estimate the dynamics of power. I'm sure you'll be interested in that. So now, when you look at the spousal economic differences, you see that when the wife, right? So you can see that education is the wife's education minus husband's education. If you have more education than your husband, then your power goes up. That's positive and significant. The age thing, it says that, so consistent with the literature, women married to less educated or younger men have more power. Peter, that's
what I would predict, yeah.
Yeah. Great.
Well, certainly in a developed world context.
Developed, okay.
Yeah.
Okay. But I haven't thought about this cohort of age, so I need to think about that and the cohort later on. Yeah. The above median wealth, so there are these wealth variables, right? The above median wealth households, they have less power. That is consistent with the same type of culture as the high caste. They're not the same, but they are similar in other ways. Urban have more power. Okay, now we go back to that interaction. So now I'm going to bring in the interaction across the identity groups. Again, I pasted testable hypothesis 1 there. And if you just look at, so now you don't need to look at the table because I put it there, right? So that I've calculated the dummies for the different categories for you. So low caste, like that, 0.03, high caste. So all I can say from here in terms of my hypothesis, whoa, oh, it's gone down. So there is support for both. If you look at that hypothesis, I'm finding support for both bargaining theory and identity theory. It just applies to different groups, okay? And I think there's a very important implication here that it's not the policy. It's the same policy, right? Okay. So now we go to hypothesis 2. Remember what that was, right? That whole thing. And so that relationship that I had laid out for you, so you can see that order, right? Minus 0.12, then it is minus 0.04, okay? And it's trying to get insignificant. Then it is minus 0.08, then it plus 0.08. So there is a little bit of a non-confirmation between the low caste B, low caste high, but I can live with that. But I take that. I'm glad so so it's evidence that for the same policy, okay, utility loss alpha C and the compensatory decrease in wife's power increases as we move from less conservative to more conservative households. But the more important point is that the dominant theory, okay, that explains this impact switches from bargaining theory to identity theory, which is, I think, a pretty important finding for policy purposes.
Maybe just a quick comment on this.
Yes.
I'm just thinking if the size of treatment matters. For example, if it's about the inheritance of land, then if I'm getting just 1 hectare, or if I'm getting 2 hectares, that can have some impact. I'm wondering if this unconfirmation of the
I think that's a very interesting question. And I think I have something in my data where I can go to size effects, right? Mm-hmm. But let me do the conclusion. I'll come back to you about, okay?
Sandeep?
Yeah.
In your models 3 and 4, you have the caste treatment dummies, and you're measuring education and whether it's a medium income household. Isn't that sort of double measuring?
At the caste dummies, yeah.
Isn't the caste capturing all of the other explanatory
No.
variables you have?
No.
No.
So it's like, it's a social group, right? So I can belong to the high caste or I can belong to the low caste, right?
Yeah, but doesn't it come at education and income and likelihood of?
They might be correlated, right? But you can, so the moment you put that in, you are separating out, right? Yeah.
So you distinguish this identity effect, whether someone was married at the time that the policy came into effect, or whether they got married after it or before?
Because the treatment, okay?
Because if you
you're married
someone,
after,
you already know what their inheritance status is. It's different than you might have chosen that person for that reason, compared to it comes into effect while you're married.
so are you saying that if I know that the law is coming and there's an anticipation that my income is gonna go up? Is that what you're saying? Because the treatment is only for people who are unmarried at the time when the law came into their state. It doesn't, if you're married, then you're not treated. You don't get, you don't get that inheritance, right? Okay. What I'm going to do is I'm going to skip through a couple of slides for the conclusion, and I'm going to come back to this slide and we can talk more. So here I just summarize, or maybe I should summarize. We empirically, so we test our hypothesis. Should I go through it or should I go for questions? Or should I go? Okay. So we examine the role of bargaining theory versus identity theory using a large data set. Bargaining theory, the main economic motivation for targeting of empowerment policies, predicts an unambiguous positive effect. Our conceptual framework suggests how negative identity effects can offset or even reverse this prediction. We test our hypothesis using, we empirically confirm the presence of significant identity effects, okay? So the previously unnoticed identity effects have immediate important implications for empowerment policies. For instance, India's growth emphasizes now, women-led development, that sort of a thing. Modi's policy. Many women-related policies operate in the country. Between 2005 and 2015, there were like 70 or 80 policies. One of these policies transferred cash to 83 million women in the country. That is gigantic expenditure. These are substantial amounts also. So many of these cash transfers, they're not just, they can be for other things also, but behind it, it's a cash transfer, right? Are predicated on the idea of positive bargaining power effects. Given our findings, negative identity effects need to be a complementary consideration in such programs. Here, this is one thing I want to mention, which goes back to your earlier thing, right? So one reason why identity effects have gone unnoticed, despite a large socioeconomic literature on social norms, is because programs do not consider modeling gender prescriptions and norms beyond their contextual role. So even the separate sphere bargaining model that I'm telling you, that model lives and dies on that separate spheres, and it cannot be that, oh, I specialize in carpentry and my wife specializes in something else, and it has to be gender norms for that commitment to work when you come from non-cooperation to cooperation. So they do not think beyond their contextual role. Identity economics, this is what I think is nice, is that it integrates these norms into behavioral models, making them partially endogenous or approachable, something that was unapproachable before, and therefore provides new insights on their impact on economic behavior. Okay, that's one. But by doing so, it also suggests avenues for changing the social norms. Okay. At least in the way, so then that's the discussion we were having about Amazon, this, that, at least in the way that now you know this is a household group level parameter alpha C, then the big social norm, immutable, right? So, so at least in the way it is framed and perceived in the minds of individuals, okay, that can be a, and as India economy grows, women get better, the identity considerations that we uncover will become more important, because the more better they get, the more of a concern this is. Okay, I can go back to any slide you want. And there might be questions online.
Yeah, can you go back to the results section?
Yes.
No. Forward. Yeah.
Here?
The one, the last.
On this slide. Yeah.
No. Forward. The one where you say that.
No. So forward.
Yeah. So the bargaining.
Forward.
Yeah. Forward.
First, let's go there.
Yeah.
Here.
Here.
Okay.
How are you concluding that the dominant theory switches from bargaining theory to identity theory?
As we move, right? Do you see the red? This red.
Yeah.
The red is negative, right? So what explains this? How is it that income went up and women's power went down? That is right. But as you go to the right, do you see that these coefficients are positive? So the explanation switches from identity theory to bargaining theory.
Yes, but how is that dominant becoming dominant? I mean, how is that? You are saying by the line the dominant theory switches from bargaining theory to identity theory.
When you go this way.
Okay.
Okay, least least conservative to more conservative.
So Sandeep, would you go to, who is the Prime Minister, Modi?
Yeah.
And tell him, okay, now you're gonna make conditional transfers based on caste, and if you throw some money to high caste, it's no good. Because if your goal is to empower women, that's not gonna work. So target your transfers, your cash transfer to the low caste, or those for which the bargaining, is that what you would, I mean, I'm being very blunt here.
No, be blunt, but I'm just telling you that is true and that I wouldn't say because it's not, I mean, that is the exact thing I'm saying, right? But if whether I'll go and say to Modi or not, that's not a conversation. Because even yeah.
Have you experimented just by replacing your dependent variables to what Mohammed?
Yes, that's the next.
And do you find?
No, I haven't done it.
Oh, you haven't done it?
Yeah, so I want to, there's a set of complementary things, right? So one thing I want to say, a lot of things, like when you guys present your work, when you have some theory, it's not like the fishermen and women are going and doing those integrations, right? So there's a lot of it is as if, right? So when I say that I get threatened by my wife's work and then she gives up her bargaining power, the problem why it is so important is it's as if she gives up her bargaining power. But how does it manifest for real couples? She'll do a lot of housework. And that is a big concern, right? Both in development and developing countries, when they spend a lot of time in housework, there are underinvestments in their human capital, and that perpetuates, right? So when I say bargaining power goes down, that's how it's actually manifest. And in terms of, so what I wanted to do, I wanted to see when this happens, how does the, I have very few variables on related to housework, which I listed, right? So when you say other power measures, I don't want to do a rope because that's the power measure I want to use. But then I want to look at, as you said, does she spend more time checking on the kids' homework when she gets it, right? So, yeah.
Marina?
I just quickly, the caste, is that in the data set? Did they tell you what the caste is?
Yeah.
For these individuals? Okay, and then the veil, that's defined by the religion? Or is that also?
The caste, that's very nice. So let me just show you really quickly. Oh, I should have stopped in this slide. So if you look at this really quickly,
Yeah.
you see Hindu, right?
Yeah.
High caste, low caste, forget about the numbers.
Right.
So, and then you have that parda, right? That veiling, parda, no parda, that's how it works. You can have Hindu,
Right.
parda, Hindu no parda, Hindu parda.
Is that in the
Yes.
census?
It's in the data set I'm using.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Last comment?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Go back to the first table. Are these all linear probabilities?
Yeah, they're all linear probabilities.
I guess.
Where did you want me to go?
The first table? Yeah.
Here? Or,
Fine. So the wealth is in there, but it's household.
yes, it's household.
But wait, okay. So is it possible, this may be a crazy idea, is it possible their bargaining power has gone down, but their welfare has gone up? Utility goes down, holding everything else constant, but they got an income shock.
Let me just think about that their power went down, but in the final equilibrium, they are better off, right? I mean, their utility went up, right? See, the problem is this: when you come to that upper phase, the cooperative equilibrium, right? It is that joint household utility. So is your question?
No, exactly. But I mean, suppose they invested in education and then that education coefficient was positive. They took their money to invest in education.
Yeah.
I don't know which direction it would go.
But are you saying that in that cooperative equilibrium, can her utility go up?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so what's
Yeah.
the trade-off?
Let me think about that. I knew you would ask my question. Give me at least a few minutes.
Just save it.
So let me just.
Save it till the clock.
Okay, so. Right, you're worse off, you give up bargaining power, but when you come up to the top, you have less say over your decisions, right? Right, so, and you're saying that when you do that, I can only comment on the household utility, right? I
But that's where
know,
the income shock is showing up, because you're using the household.
yeah. I don't think I'm clear of your question.
We'll talk about it.
Yes, yes.
Okay, thank you, Sandeep, that was really fascinating.